Right, we talked about this a little bit earlier, yesterday, in fact, that the price of drugs is going to be dropping in Canada because of some legislation that had come in. And I think people are surprised to know just how expensive drugs are here in Canada, but not as expensive as they are in the United States.
Yeah. Well, we talked about expensive scotch on Monday and cheap drugs today, so it's kind of
exactly.
Yeah.
So what's going to be dropping? Is it the generic drugs, or is it the actual brand name drugs?
It would be generic drugs.
Okay.
So that's the price that the BC government is going to pay for generic drugs. So they're the big buyer of the drugs. So they kind of set a price to what they're going to pay. You know, previous to the price drop to 25%, we were paying 35%.
Wow, so that's significant.
Yeah, and before 2010, it was between 60 and 70%. So the BC government is really driving down the price of generic drugs. You know, because a lot of people can't afford it, and also companies, it's very expensive for companies to provide that kind of money for support for pharmacare.
We're seeing savings of over $100 million, in fact. It's quite significant.
Yeah, it is. Which is great for the consumer. On the other side of it is you have to look at how it affects, say, pharmacies. Pharmacists get their money from selling the drugs, but they don't actually make a lot of money from the generic drugs. They get bonuses for what they sell, the amount of drugs they sell, generic drugs. So, so there's an issue there. Also, if you think about it, the generic drug makers, they don't invest a lot of money in R&D, and it costs a huge amount of money to develop these drugs. You know, it'd be like $1 billion in 10 years to develop the drug. So that's why they have a patent for 20 years or so. Right,
and that's what a lot of these drugs are developed by one company, and then they, like you mentioned, they have the patent. Once the patent runs out, then everyone can make their, like, you know, like penicillins or anything like that. So that's why we see all these generic drugs right now are so available, because those patents were a long time developed so many years ago.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them expired. They get about 20-year window where they can exploit the, you know, the investment they put into the drugs. So and then the generic drug makers can make them for way cheaper. So.
Is that always safe for the consumer, generic drugs? Because there's always been this, do you want the generic drug or do you want the company?
I want the brand name. It looks better.
Yeah, I know that's always but you know, a lot of plans that people have just can't afford to go with the drug maker.
Right. Well, I think the recipe is basically the same, you know, but it's just the fact that once that 20-year window is open, then anybody can make them. So so there's the investment you get back on it. But as I say, you know, the investment from generic drug makers in developing an R&D in Canada is virtually nothing compared with what the big drug makers pay.
Well, $100 million savings is always good. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks. We'll be back in about an hour and a bit, talk more business news. Okay, if you want some more information, BIV.com for business in Vancouver. So right now, we'll head to Caitlin and get some traffic.